Ju Chi Chu Nam La Chan Chu Ba Du Da Ni Cha Son Shi Da Ye Jin So Ji Pe So Nam Ji Ru La Bian Ji San Ji Ru Ba Ru Zan Ji Ju Dan So Ji Shu Nam La Chan Chu Ba Du Da Ni Cha Son Shi Da Ye Jin So Ji Pe So Nam Ji Ru La Bian Ji San Ji Ru Ba Ru Zan Ji Ju Dan So Ji Shu Nam Chan Chu Ba Du Da Ni Cha Son Shi Da Ye Jin So Ji Pe So Nam Ji Ru La Bian Ji San Ji Ru Ba Ru Zin Jian Dang Xie De Wai Dan De Zhe Dan Dian Bai Zhe Jian Du Na Dan Du Na Jie Zhe Dan Zha Wai Zhe Ji Du Na Mi Bei De Wai Dan Ba Dan Mi Zha Wai Zhe Ji Nie Lin Jia Dan Ni Dan Zha Wei Dan Yuan Jian Bo Lai Ni Ban Zhu Ji. So it's very nice to be back here after so long, and I'm glad that I had the chance to show you those slides beforehand. Lama Yeshe Rinpoche especially wanted you all to see that. It will eventually be on public release. I think it will end up on YouTube, but he wanted you to have a special preview of that. There's also another very important film, which is called Akong, A Remarkable Life. Have any of you seen that?
Yes.
Was that shown here in the centre? Great. So those two, the Akong Remarkable Life and then also this slideshow, are really beautiful documentaries of Akong Rinpoche's activity and the establishment of Buddhism in the West, particularly Samye and Akong Remarkable Life. The film also shows Akong Rinpoche's other activities, and so I think those are very precious things to watch and gives us a lot of inspiration around what a human being can achieve if they really wish to help others. So tonight I'm just going to, give a little talk and maybe you can ask questions. I want to say a few things about Samye, about the slideshow. Some of you know me, some of you don't. I'm a monk from Samye. I've been there for many years. So it's really beautiful for me to see that slideshow because I remember so many of those things. I arrived 25 years ago after most of the hard work had been done, so I arrived at the right time. I arrived just in 1993 when the temple had been built. But I was there when we were building the stupas and the butter lamp house and all of those things. And I was at Samye, I was 21, I was very young when I arrived. And I, after 3 or 4 years of being there, I became Akong Rinpoche's attendant. And so I was his attendant for 20 years, right up until he passed away. First of all his attendant and then also his secretary. And he brought me to South Africa the first time in 1997. So I've been coming here with him many times for the last 20 years. And I'm very grateful for everything that he did for me, and he taught me everything I know. And I spend a lot of time now trying to continue the projects that he asked me to do. I remember when he passed away, one of the first thoughts that came in my head, well, obviously, first of all, I was incredibly shocked and upset by what had happened, especially the horrible manner in which he died. And then the next thought that came up was I suddenly, as one is intrinsically selfish and one always ends up thinking of oneself, and I thought, what am I going to do now? I've lost him. What am I going to do? And I had this kind of image that Rinpoche and I both had online. We both had iPads, and our diaries were synced. So on each other's iPad, we'd see what each other's was doing. And I looked at my diary, and it was all him. Everything was all mapped out to travel with him for the next year, and all of that had gone. And I thought, what will I do? Maybe I'll just sit around doing nothing now. But actually, what happened was very quickly after he passed away, I became incredibly busy and just carried on with the same intensity of travels and work that I was doing with him, and I tried to keep him in my heart and tried to fulfill the kind of work he'd asked me to do. So he had been very encouraging of the work of bringing meditation into non-Buddhist areas as well. So he got me to teach in companies and schools and hospitals and drug rehab centres, prisons, and he told me exactly what to teach. Everything I teach in those places is exactly what he said. He was very clear how to start the session, what to say in the session, how to end the session, what practices to give people. And he said one of the most useful things one can do is to teach loving kindness and compassion in the corporate world, because actually it's the corporate world that runs the world, not politics. Most politicians are in the pocket of business people, and of course we can see that very, very clearly. And so he said, if you go into the corporate world and teach compassion and loving kindness, that's a very helpful and useful thing to do. So that's what I've been trying to do ever since he passed away. I don't only work in the corporate world, I also work in education and healthcare. I design meditation training programs for doctors and nurses, and have been implementing them in universities. So the work I do is very interesting, actually, because I'm in so many diverse situations, very varied and all across the world. And the basic idea is just to help people to learn more and more about meditation, and particularly compassion-based meditation. There's no intention to try to convert people to Buddhism. There's no mission to try and spread the word of Buddhism or anything like that. It's simply about trying to help people to have more happy, more peaceful, more compassionate minds. And I always try to keep in my heart the things that Rinpoche taught.
It shows.
And I once asked him to give me teachings on a particular text, a text which I was teaching a lot, and he'd given me the transmission of the text, which is called the Lung, the reading transmission, but I asked him for elaborate teachings on the text, and he just laughed at me and he said, what teaching is there? You have to actually practice, otherwise it's just words. And I'm still trying to understand what he said, because I'm certainly not practicing well and I'm not living the Dharma in the way I could. But it was an inspiring thing to hear that actually the most important study is to live the teachings, and he really was an example of that. And I was so lucky to spend so much time with him, kind of in his pocket, because I travelled all around the world with him. I spent all my time kind of glued to his side, except the period when I was in the 4-year retreat. And I saw him close up, and really, he was always the same. Some people might assume he was this sort of holy being on the throne, and then backstage it's a different story. But he was unchangeable. He was always living in the state of compassion at all times. And his mission is the wrong word, but maybe his activity was all about benefiting others in whatever way was possible. And I really feel that he was the living embodiment of the 6 paramitas. The 6 paramitas are the transcendent practices of the bodhisattva. What is a bodhisattva? A bodhisattva is somebody who is completely committed to benefiting all beings in whatever way is needed. They don't have an agenda. They simply benefit beings according to what will be beneficial. So in the famous prayer of the Bodhisattva it says, "May I be medicine, May I be food. May I be a bridge for those who need to cross the water. May I be whatever others need. And I think Akon Rinpoche was an incredible example of that. And I remember one discussion I had with him. He said once, it wasn't just with me, but there was a group of people. We were in Spain and we were having always these beautiful events where Rinpoche would give an empowerment, and then afterwards everybody would sit with him and chat. I'm sure you've experienced that here with him. And everyone was sitting around chatting, and he was talking about his work in Tibet, as he was going to Tibet every year for 5 months to do field work. Very, very dangerous work and very harsh, no cars, going by horse. He was in his 70s, going on horse back to places with very little oxygen and trying to help all of these orphans. At one point he was responsible each year for 10,000 people, the education and healthcare of 10,000 people. And he was talking about these trips, and he was saying how incredibly dangerous these trips were, and how his family back home would always beg him not to go because it was so dangerous. And then he said, but when you go to these orphanages and you see the hundreds, sometimes thousands of children who reach out to me and call me daddy, and they have no one else to help them, he said, when I see that, it breaks my heart, and it's impossible for me not to carry on with this work. And I was so moved when he said that, and I said, and he said, and if I die in this work, if anything happens to me, it means nothing, as long as I've been able to work for others. And I was very moved by this, and I said, Rinpoche, that it just feels like that is the commitment of a bodhisattva. And he looked at me with a kind of look of confusion. He said, I don't know anything about commitments or bodhisattvas. I just don't know how to stop. And I thought, that's real commitment, where there is no commitment. They're just living the teachings. And in the 6 paramitas, we have these 6 transcendent practices: generosity, pure conduct, patience, discipline. Are they in the wrong order? Sorry, generosity, pure conduct, patience, discipline, meditation, and wisdom. And out of these 6, the foundation of generosity is so important as a basis for everything. And in the teachings of generosity, in the 6 paramitas, it subdivides generosity into 3 types. And it's very obvious when you look at Akon Rinpoche and his work that he was the living embodiment of these 3 types of generosity. The first type is called material generosity, the second is called supportive generosity, and the third is called spiritual generosity. So material generosity means to give things, to give material things to people who need them. So helping the poor, helping the needy, giving food, giving medicine, giving whatever people need in the most skillful and the most compassionate way, without any ego. Because very often we give with ego, don't we? I give and I want something back, and there's that sort of transaction, but pure generosity without ego. And so in this aspect of material generosity, you find all of Akon Rinpoche's humanitarian work. So the Rokpa charity. Rokpa is a charity Rinpoche started that means to help. To help, or it literally means friend, or to help. It means to help where help is needed. And Rokpa is the charitable. So Rinpoche has 3 activities: charity, therapy, and dharma. So the Rokpa side is the material generosity. And Rokpa is a charity that still goes on and has projects all over the world, in some of the world's most poor and dangerous areas. We have many projects in the Tibetan regions of China and in Nepal and India. And of course, closer to home here, we have many projects in Zimbabwe and South Africa. Here in this city of Johannesburg, there is the soup kitchen, where they go regularly to give soup to those who are homeless. And that's always been a project very close to Rinpoche's heart. And I had the amazing opportunity once to go with him with the soup kitchen, and I just remember him walking through these, you know where it is, in this very kind of heavy area, and he was walking in this very bright golden shirt, walking amongst this sea of homeless people, and he had this golden shirt on, just glowing, and he was walking amongst this sea of children, and all these kids were completely high on glue, and he was walking up to them and stroking their faces and just giving them so much love and then giving them food. And so this is just totally helping others in the most immediate sense, with food, with medicine, with clothing. And so Rokpa charity is very instrumental in carrying out Rinpoche's humanitarian vision, and that's the parameter of material generosity. Then the second type of generosity is called supportive generosity. That means to give support, and it means to be a friend to those who are lonely. It means to give kindness and help to those who are needing support, needing protection, needing safety. So in that category one finds all of Akon Rinpoche's therapy activities. So the Tara Rokpa therapy is a huge and vast and very profound system of mind training that Rinpoche created based on a synthesis of Western psychology and Eastern, so Buddhist psychology. Very profound techniques for mental transformation and the development of compassion. And also there is the work around medicine and healthcare, particularly Tibetan medicine. And then the third aspect of generosity, which is considered to be the most important, is the gift of Dharma, spiritual generosity. So the reason why that is the most important is because there is no higher gift than the gift of liberation. So of course we must feed the homeless, we must help the sick, and do all these things to benefit others. But the highest gift is to give somebody the keys through which they can liberate their minds, because it means they have then removed the causes of suffering and they can progress on the path to enlightenment. So the gift of Dharma is the most precious, the most important, and so of course that's a major part of Akon Rinpoche's work. And you saw in the slideshow the establishment of Samye, which was not just a building. I mean, in that slideshow it showed lots of scaffolding and builders and all of that, but it's a building for what? It's a building for the preservation and teaching of the pure Dharma. And at Samye we've had teachings from the greatest masters of Tibetan Buddhism, including Akon Rinpoche and Lama Yeshe Rinpoche, of course. And then also spreading from there we have all the centres. So Akon Rinpoche started centres all over the world, and many centres in this region of the world. And he and his brother and successor, Lama Yeshe Rinpoche, established this centre and the other centre in Johannesburg and many other places in Africa. And what are these centres? They're places for the teaching and practice of Buddhism, which means giving people the keys to liberation. And this is the most precious. But it's something which has to be done with great care, not in a kind of sort of casual or sloppy way, which is why Akon Rinpoche had the highest standards when it comes to Dharma centres. You can see how in the film it showed that he was very clear about the exact dimensions of the Buddha statues, because he said when, in centuries to come, when archaeologists find the ruins, they have to find a perfect Buddha statue. So I'm really inspired to see the statue you guys have got for your shrine. It's absolutely beautiful. And the way the centre is set up and the environment is very, very perfect and very beautiful and clean and welcoming. That's very, very important. And then, of course, within the centre, the important thing is the teaching and practice, and not just talking, but actually doing the practice. And so I know that many people here are practicing, and that's a very, very precious and important thing. And of course, you have Melanie guiding you, so you have somebody here who can give you instruction and teaching, and then other people, such as myself, come when we can and help out as well. So, this gift of Dharma is the most precious and the most profound. And then all of these aspects of compassionate activity are all based on this single principle of love, pure love and compassion. That is really the essence of the teaching of Buddha. Once somebody asked Akon Rinpoche to define Buddhism, and he said, it is simply 100% compassion. It is where compassion is completely filling up one's being from head to toes, and one is living that compassion. But that compassion needs to be unconditional, limitless, without ego, and without expectation. Rinpoche often used to talk about compassion with no limits and no expectations. And that's only possible if we train our minds. Because it's very good to go out there and help people and be kind and do things for others. But if we're not also training our minds, then the compassion doesn't become pure. It's always held in by our limitations. I remember the first time I came to Johannesburg with Akon Rinpoche in 97 or something like that. I'd never been here before, and I was quite struck by many things. One of them was that in those days, this centre wasn't here, we had the centre in Kensington, and I was struck by how one would be sitting in this shrine room doing Chenrezig puja, and you can hear gunshot outside. And I just thought, this is very visceral, this experience of pain and suffering. And the other thing was the fact that this centre is kind of on the top of a hill, and then down in the valley you have all of this terrible suffering and poverty and need, and then we were going down in the soup kitchen and feeding people. And I remember one evening we were doing Chenrezig puja with Akon Rinpoche, and at the end of the puja there was a chance for kind of questions and answers. And there was a young lady who at that time was very much heading up the soup kitchen. She was very involved in the soup, and that was her big project, and she was very committed to that and very enthusiastic and very passionate. And at the end of the puja, she was very honest. I really admired her honesty. She stood up and said to Rinpoche, "Rinpoche, it just feels so artificial. We're all sitting here on our ivory tower doing prayers when people down in the streets need our help. This feels so fake. What are we doing?" And Rinpoche gave the most beautiful answer. He said, "You're doing this so that you can do that properly. Because if you train in limitless compassion through Chenrezig practice, for example, or any meditation that we do, then when you're helping the poor, you will do it from the right perspective, in the right way, from an enlightened perspective, you could say." A story I heard that relates to this is that when Rinpoche visited one of the Rokpa projects in Nepal, where they serve soup every day to the homeless, he saw how they were serving the soup, and they were sort of a huge cauldron of sort of dal or whatever it is, and they have these ladles, and the beggars are all sitting in a row with their bowls, and the volunteers carry the soup thing and ladle the soup out. And he stopped them and he said, "That's not very respectful, because you're just kind of throwing the soup down into the bowls of these people who you feel are lower than you." He said, "Actually, these people are Buddhas. They are Buddhas who have appeared in front of you to teach you compassion and humility. So you should kneel down in front of each beggar and you should offer them the soup in exactly the same way as you would place a flower on the shrine. Because that's what you're doing. Your compassion is your training, and therefore those who are the recipients of your compassion are your gurus, and you should take refuge in them rather than see yourself as somehow superior to them and giving them who are so weak and below you." And I thought this was such a powerful example of respect and compassion that goes beyond limits. Because I think we all have an idea of compassion. We all know what compassion is. It's a very natural quality of the mind. Humans, but also animals. We see compassion everywhere, and we know what it feels like. It's not a high spiritual quality that we don't know what it is. It's something we all feel. Everyone feels that love or kindness or compassion at various times. But of course the idea of Dharma practice is to stabilize that and to expand it so that it fills our entire being. You see, for most of us, compassion is a feeling that switches on and switches off at various times. For somebody like Rinpoche, and that's hopefully where we're heading in our practice, it should become our very being, the way that our entire mind could be filled with that compassion. Because at the moment it's something that switches on and off like a light bulb, which is fine, but it needs to be expanded. So I think when we think of compassion, maybe we have a relationship with that word that's more around feelings, feeling compassion. We feel something. And that's a start, but it's just like a seed that we could water into a flower. Only through meditation. Because through meditation we learn to expand beyond the boundaries of self. This idea of self that we hold on to so strongly kind of ruins everything. There's a beautiful sentence in the 7 Points of Mind Training where it says, you're kind of talking to your ego and you say, look, Mr. Ego, you've dragged me through samsara for centuries, I'm just fed up now. It's enough. I think it's such a great prayer. So what is it our ego does to our compassion? What it does is it holds it down in quite a few ways. One of them is a sort of expectation. There's always that expectation. That's the first thing. So Rinpoche always used to talk about non-expectation compassion. I do a lot of work in hospitals now with doctors and nurses, and one of the main things they tell me about is what they call compassion burnout, compassion fatigue. And so people in the caring profession, they're really kindly motivated, they're wanting to help others, but they get very burned out and very fatigued. And this is something which can be remedied through meditation, because what happens is when the compassion is very much it's not expanded, it's not limitless, then it will feel like one is drained, almost like feeding others from an empty dish. So I think we have compassion, but it often contains an expectation of some kind of result. You know how it feels when you help somebody and then sometimes it's very much that we want something back, almost like a business transaction. But sometimes it's more subtle, where you help somebody and you're kind to them and you feel that there should be some kind of recognition for that, you know? You know how it feels when you've been very kind to somebody and then they do something and you feel very let down? What's the first phrase that comes up in our mind? After all I've done for them, how could they? How many times have we thought that? You know, this thought is a natural thought that the human being has, but it's coming from ego, isn't it? I did this for them, so there are sort of rules now, you know? I love you, you need to love me back. If you don't behave well, I'll cancel the love. It's almost like a transaction. I've done so much for them, and now they've hurt me, so I feel like my love and compassion almost wasn't paid back in the right way. It feels like that. Or sometimes the expectation it works in a different way, which is that we help others and we sort of expect a result. At least there should be a result. Do you know about Chenrezig and his nervous breakdown? You know, Chenrezig is the bodhisattva of great compassion. He literally had a nervous breakdown. So what happened was Chenrezig, in the story, Chenrezig was helping sentient beings, countless beings, and the more beings he helped, the more he saw there were still beings to help. And the enormity of the fact that there was no end to this literally made his head explode. And then he manifested as the 11-faced, 1,000-armed Chenrezig. So it was sort of like an enlightenment, but a nervous breakdown. His head exploded. He became this 11-faced, 1,000-armed Chenrezig, which is a symbol for compassion that will never give up and is completely in all directions. And so the expectation that we experience in our compassion is almost that we need to see there was a result, otherwise why did we bother? And this is very draining, isn't it? And so we want to feel it was worth helping somebody. And so there's always that ego investment. I need to feel my time was well spent. Whereas the real bodhisattva path is to just give without limits and never expect anything back. And do you know that's why we make offerings on the shrine? People often get mystified by this. They say, why do you Buddhists spend so much energy on golden Buddha statues and bowls of flowers and all this stuff on the shrine? Why are you doing all of that? Are you sort of worshipping some kind of god or deity? And it's not at all. It's simply a psychological tool for building non-expectation. Because whenever you offer something on the shrine, the Buddha doesn't pat you on the head and say, "Good boy," "Good girl." There's no recognition. You make an offering on the shrine, and you're opening up the channel of generosity, but without getting any comeback. You don't see somebody smile. You know, when you give a gift, you want to see them smile. That's a beautiful thing, but it also shows that there's this need for it was worth it. So making offerings on the shrine is sort of a way of actually generating that non-expectation. It's very interesting. So I'm talking about compassion. I'm talking about how so often our compassion is ego-based, and how meditation can help to somehow loosen that up, expand beyond those boundaries. And the first aspect of ego-based compassion is where it contains expectation. The second aspect is where it contains preference and bias. And that's so obvious, isn't it? That we have so much preference and bias in our lives. We have a special compassion and love for those who we're close to, our friends and family. Of course, that's very natural. But it's a sense of the in-group and the out-group. This is my in-group, these are my friends, my family, and then those outside of that boundary are left in the cold. And actually, if one thinks about it, this is a completely illusory game that we play, the game of friendship. Because we have our friends, we all have our circle of friends, but it's an illusion if you think about it. Because somebody who's our best friend now, we didn't maybe know them 10 years ago. They were a stranger on the street. We couldn't care less what happened to them. Whereas now if they even stub their toe, we run to their rescue because they're our friend. But they weren't our friend 5 minutes ago or 10 years ago, and now they're the most important person in our life. And next year they may be a stranger again. We may not. How many friends have we had who now we don't know where they are? What does that actually mean? It actually means that every single sentient being is potentially our friend. We just haven't met them yet. So limitless compassion means to understand that everybody is the same. We're all equal. We're all in the same boat. We're all one family. That's what it means in the texts when it says mother sentient beings. I am their mother, they are my mother. There's that sense of closeness that we're trying to generate. So we have this preference, this feeling that we'll love certain people and at certain times, you know. And in that world of preference, there's of course other examples. For example, we of course have compassion for strangers, but only at certain times. For a stranger to be the recipient of our compassion, they have to present a strong enough case. You know? When you're walking down a busy street in the centre of town, shopping, and there's all these people walking past you, who are they? Who are those people? They're just strangers, objects not to bump into. We don't feel anything for them. But then what if one of them, especially if they're a child or an old person, falls over, trips over, and is crying on the street? Suddenly something activates in our heart, and we feel compassion, and hopefully we reach out and pick them up or ask them if they're okay. Why did they have to fall over to get our compassion? Why is it that before that point we feel nothing for them? When they fall over we feel compassion? Well, the answer is obvious. The answer is because now we see the suffering and it jerks or activates something in our heart. But the Buddhist understanding of suffering is that it's not just what's on the surface. It's what's deep down inside, and everybody carries inner, hidden suffering. They don't necessarily show it on their faces. We can assume it's there because we know it's there within us. And this is one of the biggest things one learns when one starts meditating. Is when we start meditating, we see how messy our mind is. You know, we thought we were so together and so organised and so professional and so adult and educated and free and all that stuff. And then we sit down to meditate and the teacher says, right, follow your breathing. Well, it fails pretty fast, doesn't it? Because we try to follow our breathing, and within seconds we're planning menus in our head, and writing emails, and wishing the person next to us didn't fidget so much, or whatever it is, thinking, or hearing dogs barking outside and thinking, what's going on? Is my car being broken into? Or whatever. The thoughts are just rampant. And then we think, oh my goodness, I'm supposed to be doing meditation, so we're back to the breath, and then we're skiing in the Alps, planning a holiday, planning a really delicious revenge, whatever it is that our mind is doing. And then suffering arises, painful memories, desires, jealousy, arrogance, depression, sadness, anxiety. And we realize that we have so little control over our minds. And we see how much suffering we carry. This is actually a very beautiful thing, because it shows us the human experience. It shows us human nature. And it can make us more sensitive to the pain of others. So when we walk down the street and everybody there is looking quite ordinary with placid faces, actually there's a whole story underneath, isn't there? The hidden suffering, the conditioned suffering, the suffering of conditioned existence, they call it, which is very subtle, hidden suffering and pain. So if you think about it like that, every single sentient being is worthy of our compassion. We don't have to wait until they tell us their story. It's very interesting. I work with teams in busy office situations where everyone's at each other's throats all the time. And I say to them, when somebody comes into work and they're being really irritating, and you all gang up in the coffee room and bitch about them, we do that, don't we? How dare they say this and how dare they say that? Why they've been so horrible? Actually do not know that something's going on inside them that you just can't see. And isn't it interesting how when you find out, so you're at work and there's somebody behaving in a certain way that you don't like. I'm sure there are abusive situations that maybe need to be contained. I'm not saying just lie in the street and let people walk all over you, but you know how it is when you see somebody behaving a certain way and then you find out that something horrible happened to them the day before. You immediately kind of forgive them. You think, oh, that's why. But there's always a that's why. There's always a that's why. Everyone is suffering in certain ways, hidden ways, unknown ways. So this mode of thinking, being sensitive to the deep suffering of sentient beings, opens up a sense of universal compassion. Because I was talking here about preference, where we have certain compassion for our friends and family, and then strangers when they look incredibly vulnerable. Only then. But actually to have a sensitivity that everyone's suffering can open up a sense of compassion for all. Okay? And then, of course, another aspect of preference is where we have compassion, but definitely not towards certain individuals. Our enemies, our governments, we demonize people, don't we? So there are our enemies, those who've hurt us directly, and then those in the world who do dreadful things, those who do terrible things. We obviously in some way feel it would be shocking to have compassion for them, because are we then allowing them to do what they do? But doesn't that show that maybe our definition of compassion is very much just being soft and gentle? It's not that. It's actually about wishing them to be free from their ignorance and pain that's making them behave in that way. So actually, the enemy is the greatest teacher. I remember once Akon Rinpoche said, the fastest way to enlightenment is to have people insult you and abuse you. He said that's the fastest path to enlightenment. It's quite a shocking statement. And it doesn't mean go out in the streets and just ask people to beat you up. It doesn't mean that. But it means any time somebody pushes your button, they are giving you the fast path to enlightenment. Because what are they doing? They are testing your compassion, and if you can have compassion and forgiveness to them, you've really achieved something. Having compassion towards small, fluffy animals and children is easy. But to have compassion towards the person who's really hurt you, that's a huge achievement. So that person is your guru. because they're giving you the chance for enormous development. Whether it's a person in our life, such as an enemy, or whether it's somebody we see on TV, or now it's very invasive, isn't it? You're scrolling through Facebook looking for pictures of fluffy cats, and then you have to suddenly see what Donald Trump has been up to. And it's in our face all the time, but it's really showing us the opportunities for compassion and understanding. And this was something I thought about very strongly the first time I visited a prison. One of the first things I did when I started to give meditation instruction was to work in a very quite violent and intense men's prison in the UK, where it's heavy. I mean, you before you start work, they give you all kinds of vaccinations in case the prisoners bite you, and it was a prison full of very angry men, all locked up and very confused. The second day I went in there, they put me in the sex offenders wing and basically put me in cells with people and said, just pushed me in and said, try and help them. And I was meeting people who had done horrendous things. I was told beforehand what everyone had done, so I don't know why they told me that, I'd rather not know. But anyway, they told me. And then you're meeting these people who have done terrible things, and in many cases, you know that, of course, this person does need to be contained. Don't let them on the streets. But then what? Because I just saw these prisons as huge metal boxes filled with angry men rattling the bars, feeling misunderstood. And I thought, is that it? Is that as far as this goes? Surely, if these people could be given some kind of understanding, it would help them to change the areas in their mind where they feel tormented, which have made them do what they did. Because doesn't somebody do something harmful only because they somehow are carrying a level of torment within themselves? So I think that's the thing about compassion for enemies, is to understand that people are driven by pain. People are driven by incredible amounts of pain. And this is what forgiveness really means. And this has been something that's very much been thrown in our faces as Akron Rinpoche's students. Because when he died, he was murdered by somebody we all know. Maybe you don't know, but he was somebody from Samye Ling, who'd been in Samye Ling for many years, and had been very close to Rinpoche, and close to all of us. We're all friends. And then we suddenly find out he's murdered Akron Rinpoche. And what was so moving was to see how the entire community responded with immediate forgiveness. So of course there was shock and horror at what had happened to Rinpoche, and a tremendous sense of loss. But there wasn't anger or rage against the killer. In fact, when we heard that he was being given the death penalty, we wrote letters asking for that not to happen. We wrote letters to the press and to the governments, because we don't believe in revenge. And we sat and thought about this man and what he'd done, and thought what must have happened to him to make him into this killer? What is the suffering that drove him to that desperate, horrible state?
But even a deeper thing, which Lama Yeshe told me, he said he knew this was going to happen. He told me that.
Who?
He said Rinpoche.
Yes, of course.
Knew.
Yes.
And he said he could have avoided it. That's what he told me. He said he could have avoided it, but he didn't. Now that's so interesting. I mean, that could be interpreted in many, many ways. But just think about that. It's amazing, because it's almost like he allowed the destiny to fulfill itself in a certain sense, by not... I don't know. You tell me what it means.
Well, I know Rinpoche definitely knew he was going to die because of the things he did before he left Samye Ling. I don't know whether it's true that he let himself be murdered.
No, not let himself, but that he knew it was going to happen.
He definitely knew it was the end of his time because of the things he did and said before he left, which we at the time didn't realise, but afterwards we realised he'd done certain things. For example, he left all his relics at Samye Ling, the things he normally took with him everywhere. So anyway, so talking about preference, ego. It sounds very harsh to say ego-based compassion, but what I mean is our ordinary experiences of compassion have this underlying sense of ego, and this gives rise to expectation, preference, and also another thing that happens to us is we experience compassion, but as an emotional reaction, and that's it. An emotional reaction. When we see somebody suffering or in pain, it makes something happen in our heart and we feel that emotion. And that's very good. It shows that we are not hard-hearted, selfish beings. We have this loving streak within us. But that's it. It's just an emotion. It's just feeling sad when somebody's suffering. We're triggered in some way. And the problem with that is it's not stable, because emotions come and go depending on their triggers. So when the trigger is absent, the emotion is absent. So it arises when it's triggered, then it dissolves. And the problem with that kind of emotional compassion is it turns into rage very easily, because emotions have that very volatile, love and hate are two sides of the same coin. That sort of volatile quality to them. And also it's not particularly useful. Somebody's suffering, now I'm suffering too. I've jumped in the suffering too, now we're just drowning together. That's more like empathy. Empathy. These days neuroscientists call empathy emotional contagion. The latest cutting edge trend in neuroscience is to study compassion-based meditation and to look at the difference between empathy and compassion, and to see that when you put somebody in an MRI machine and they do these tests on monks where they, sounds really horrible, but they put monks in scanners and they make them watch horrible news stories, and then they test their brain activity, and when they're only experiencing empathy, the levels of stress rise through the roof. And when they experience compassion, the stress goes down and a sense of intention arises in the brain. Intention to actually benefit others. And this is very interesting because it shows that compassion isn't just an emotion, it's actually building the networks of intention to act. And this to me is a very important point. Hello, thank you. Thank you. This to me is a really important point because people often say Buddhists are funny creatures because they talk endlessly about compassion, but then what they love to do is go and lock themselves in a room and stare at the wall, meditating. And some people even go and retreat for many, many years, and then that sounds very weird because you talk about helping others, but then you go to retreat for 20 years, who are you helping? It sounds very selfish. But of course, if you understand what compassion meditation does, is it activates the areas of the brain connected to intention and action, which means that when you come out of those meditations or retreats, you have built the neural pathways for activity, and you won't be able to stop yourself from helping others. So you're actually building those intentions, and that is what is meant by bodhicitta, building the intention to benefit others and then acting on it. Okay, so I've talked about compassion through the lens of various types of limitation. It's a very interesting way to talk about compassion, to talk about what's wrong with our ordinary compassion and how could we expand beyond that. So the limitation of expectation, the limitation of preference, the limitation of emotional reactivity, and then the fourth one, the last one I'm going to mention, is the limitation of despair and helplessness. You know, for so many people, their experience of compassion is a sense of frustration. There's so much pain in the world, there's just little old me, what can I do? So I feel completely overwhelmed and helpless and kind of powerless. And that's how many people experience compassion. Frustration, overwhelm. What can we do? There's no point. It's too much. And this overwhelm manifests in three very interesting ways. Maybe more, but I can think of three. One is, for some people, it manifests as rage. They feel so frustrated that there's so much suffering in the world, so they feel angry with everybody else. Angry with the government, angry with society, angry with the perpetrators, and one is just filled with fury. it's kind of rage or anger. And it's coming from a place of feeling frustrated and helpless. For other people it manifests as strong emotion, where one's crying all the time and feeling very overwhelmed and choked up with pain and suffering and sort of very, very upset. It's not a rage, it's more a kind of like dissolving into a puddle of tears. It's that kind of reaction. The third way, which I think is the most common, is coldness, where it's too much so we just shut down. This is the most common reaction when you walk past a homeless person on the street. It's too much, can't deal with it, so let's just not look at it, let's just carry on walking. It's kind of shut down because we think, well, I don't know what to do. If I feed one person, that's not enough, what do I do? So this sort of shutdown happens when we feel helpless in our compassion. Now the Buddhist approach to this is to develop what is called bodhicitta. Bodhicitta means limitless, unconditional compassion for the benefit of the enlightenment of all beings. So that's much higher and more profound than ordinary compassion. So bodhicitta is where you link compassion to the path of practice and meditation. So it's not just a feeling, it's not just an emotion, it's a training. So training in meditation with the intention to benefit others is the crucial point here, because then you feel you have a plan, a project. You don't need to feel helpless or overwhelmed. You can think, well, I am doing something, because every time I'm meditating, I'm building the skills to benefit others. It doesn't mean that we do 5 minutes of meditation and somehow magically somebody across town is helped by it. It's not that mystical at all. It's simply that we're building the strength. Just like Rinpoche said to my friend in Johannesburg, you're doing this so you can do that properly. You're doing the Chenrezig practice so that you're expanding your mind and compassion, so that when you help the poor, you're doing it from a more liberated perspective. So when we practice meditation, whether even 5 minutes of watching the breathing, whatever it is, if we can motivate it with that bodhicitta, that wish to benefit all beings, so it's not a selfishly motivated practice, that's what gives compassion its power, because it overcomes all those 4 limitations: preference, expectation, emotional reactivity, and helplessness. They're all completely smashed by bodhicitta, because bodhicitta is where you think, I'm going to meditate for the benefit of all beings without limit, and I want to help them to achieve limitless enlightenment. Not just feel a bit better for 10 minutes, but limitless enlightenment. And of course that's a very long-term project. But it means that every session we do has great power. You know how sometimes we feel our meditation is very kind of like a drop in the ocean? You know? But what is the ocean? It is simply the sum total of all the drops. That's what the ocean is, all those drops of water. So every time you dedicate your practice to the enlightenment of all beings, you're putting a drop in the ocean, and it becomes bigger, more expanded. And when I think of somebody like Akon Rinpoche, who was benefiting countless beings all day and all night, I know this because I used to often share a room with him or be in the next room, and he wouldn't sleep because he dealt with the West by day and Tibet by night because of the time difference. So all night he was on the phone to projects in Tibet. So I saw that it was quite hard for me because I wanted some sleep. But I saw how he worked tirelessly day and night and benefited so many beings. That, for me, is the product of meditation experience. He had trained for that. And also it's the sense of a very long-term journey, because actually, if one looks at the history of the Akong lineage, there were lifetimes leading up to that of training. The Akong that we know was called the second Akon Rinpoche, the second incarnation. The first Akon Rinpoche, and that's just as Akong, of course before that he had other lives, but the first Akon Rinpoche spent most of his life in retreat, meditating, living on 1 teaspoon of barley flour a day, not even bothering to eat, just meditating constantly. So building those practices and that bodhicitta, so that when he became our Akong, he was enthroned at the age of 4 as Akong. And at the age of 6 he started to run the monastery. Only an enlightened being could do that. And if you think of the countless beings he helped in the deepest possible way, the activity that came from his work It's quite incredible, isn't it? That's an example, though, for us. It's something we could aspire to, all of us. We don't have to think, oh, but I have responsibilities, I have a job, I have children, I'm not in a monastery, I'm not in a retreat. Those thoughts are meaningless because every moment of practice has great power. Even 5 minutes motivated in the right way will accumulate towards that ultimate goal. So this gives our practice enormous power and meaning. And I think this is so important, especially in the modern world. Am I going on too long? What time do we have to stop? Very important, especially in the modern world, where meditation has become a little bit of a fad, a trend, and a little bit connected to well-being. The well-being industry is the fastest growing industry at the moment, and it's worth billions, multi-billion dollar industry. And the well-being industry, if I'm really honest about it, because I'm also in that industry, it's not for me, I don't get paid, but I'm in those places teaching. The well-being industry is actually fueled by a massive lie, which is people are grasping after well-being, which makes them feel they lack well-being, which makes them want more well-being. And that fuels the industry. It's like when you have a company that makes both shampoo and conditioner. The shampoo dries your hair, and then you need to buy the conditioner to get the moisture back into it. It's a scam. Do you know what I'm saying? That's why I shaved my head. What I'm trying to say is that if you sit down to meditate because you want to have well-being, you're creating a sense of deficiency. Where you want that well-being, you feel you lack that well-being, it makes you hungry for more, and you go for all these different things that might give you well-being. And it never ends, you never get the well-being. Siddha Rinpoche always said, if you try to meditate for yourself, you'll never get anywhere, because a limitless goal can never be achieved with a limited motivation. There is no such thing as self-enlightenment. But we live in a culture of self-empowerment, self-actualization, the power of the self. There are enough self-help books to circle the equator 100 times. And they're all about self-help, self-actualization, the cult of the self. And that's the well-being industry in a nutshell. And so what I'm noticing now, I'm sure you're all noticing too, is that mindfulness has become a big trend. And I think it's a good thing, because I think it's really good to help people reduce stress. People are seriously stressed, give them something that's like medicine, that's great. But I think what happens after a while is the mindfulness practitioner working in that kind of well-being, stress reduction way starts to feel dissatisfied and think, well, is this all there is? What am I doing? I'm just feeling more calm, but for what? And then they have to progress into bodhicitta. That's the next step. And there is a big trend now in compassion-based mindfulness. It's becoming quite powerful, and that's great. So if one's meditation is just about feeling good, you end up with a lot of problems. And I'll share with you a very personal story about this, which is that when I first started meditating, I was a bit... I was like an addict. I was meditating in a kind of addictive way. I was very young, I was 21, and I was very confused, very messed up. Still am in many ways, but I was even worse then. And I was sort of meditating in a very obsessional way. I was living in the monastery, and I would keep just sitting down and meditating, kind of on rocks in the garden or on the path or in my room or wherever, just walking around the monastery doing lots and lots of meditation and thinking I was being a real good practitioner. But actually I started to become, the more meditation I did, the more depressed I became. So I started to walk around with this increasingly heavy sense of depression, physically feeling it in my kind of heart area. The more meditation, the more miserable. And I went to Akon Rinpoche and I said, meditation's making me depressed. And he said to me, meditation can't make you depressed. You are making you depressed. And I said, why? And he said, because you are basically a junkie. And you are meditating like somebody who's injecting heroin in their arm. you're trying to feel something, you're trying to get high, you're trying to get... He didn't use the word buzz, but the word meant buzz. He said you're trying to get a buzz from your practice. And it was so true. I was sitting down meditating and trying to feel better. And he said the more you want to feel better, the more you are coming from a place of deficiency, because you're creating the feeling that you don't feel better. You're focusing on the lack of happiness. The more you want happiness, the more you're telling yourself it's missing. So you're digging a hole within yourself. And this was an enormous teaching, because it made me think, well, actually... And he said you must meditate for the benefit of others, not for yourself. Which doesn't mean you are missed out. It means it's a win-win situation for all. But it made me think, looking back, about how some people meditate today, almost like going for a spa treatment. You know, when you go for a spa treatment, they paint your toes and put cucumbers on your eyes or whatever, and it's a nice feeling. And people maybe sometimes are approaching meditation like that, which will actually make us feel like we're going round in circles. It's called the samsara of Dharma, which means the meditation goes round in circles, getting nowhere. So it's only through compassion, the motivation of compassion, that our meditation can actually progress. So how do we do that? What does that mean? What does it mean to meditate with compassion? Well, there are many elements to that, but two I want to address today, and then we must stop. One of them is to meditate with the motivation of compassion, which means every session of meditation we do, start and end each session with a few moments of, you're doing this for the benefit of all beings. Now, in Dharma centers, we do this through prayer, we take refuge, we do the bodhicitta prayers, but there are other ways to do it as well. And when I started teaching in the corporate world, Rinpoche told me to do it there as well, not through prayers, but each session get them to sit down first of all and say to themselves, I'm dedicating this to all beings. And at the end of the session, I'm doing this for others as well as myself. So even in that situation, that bodhicitta idea can start to progress. So it means to start and end each session with a moment of motivation or intention to benefit others. That somehow invests your practice on the journey of compassion. Then the other thing is that the practice itself is the essence of compassion. Because what are you doing when you practice? You're learning to make peace with your own mind. And this is a really crucial point, because most people I know who struggle with meditation struggle for one reason alone. It's because they think they're supposed to have a silent mind, a clear mind, a mind with no thoughts, and they hate the fact that their mind is wandering, so they struggle. And that's a very dark hole to fall down, because we're trying to put ourselves into a coma when we meditate, and that's not healthy. You know what I mean? Sitting down to meditate, then there are thoughts, and we think, oh, go away, shut up. We're trying to silence the mind. I want to be clear, empty, still. That's a very harsh thing to do to your own mind. It's like trying to kill yourself, because you're trying to kill your thoughts. And this is why many people struggle in meditation, because they're actually at war with themselves. They're sitting there with a gun trying to shoot the thoughts. And actual, real, proper meditation with compassion is to sit there and not just sit there and let the mind do what it wants. You try to keep coming back to the breath or the visualization or whatever, the support, but you're not angry with your mind for wandering. In fact, the thoughts are just the natural beauty of the mind. The thoughts are the adornment of the mind. The thoughts are the energy of the mind, and they don't need to be removed. They just need to be left alone. Don't interfere with them. I think real compassion is just to leave somebody alone. I don't mean leave them in the cold, but let them be who they are. We're very bad at letting people be who they are, aren't we? We spend our whole lives saying, why is so-and-so like that? How dare he or she be like this or like that? This is very strong conversation in Dharma centres. Because Dharma centres are when people come together and judge each other 24 hours a day, because everyone's supposed to be a practitioner. So they say, why are they like this? Why are they like that? This person has done X years of practice. How dare they have any stress or emotions? Who do they think they are? You know, we do this all the time. This is how we talk about. In retreat we used to do this. We used to look at the people who... I remember Drupal Rinpoche came into our second retreat and said to us who'd already done a retreat, and they said, you know, everyone's judging you because you've done one before, and they expect you to be sort of less stressed than them. And that's what people do. We judge each other. So I think real compassion is to let somebody be who they are and just love them unconditionally. Now, if you can do that towards your own mind, that's the key. So there's thoughts, there's emotions, there's distractions. Don't interfere with them. Just leave them alone. Don't try and suppress them. Don't try and change them. Don't try and develop them. Just completely leave them alone. Rinpoche used to say, let your monkey jump in the forest. I remember he gave a meditation teaching, and the one sentence I remember from it was, let your monkey jump. And what he meant was, he didn't mean just sit there planning menus or writing emails in your head. He meant just let the mind do what it wants, but maintain awareness. And don't try and destroy the thoughts. Don't chase the thoughts. I try and think of it almost like letting traffic go by without getting into the cars. That's what compassion means, is to leave something alone and let it be what it is without trying to manipulate or change it. So can you see how in the meditation practice we are building compassion through that way of dealing with our mind, and this kind of acceptance and unconditional love will radiate out in how we view others. So I think that's a very, very important point. I find it very helpful, so I hope you do as well. So what I've tried to do tonight is give you some kind of summary of some of the things which are important in terms of compassion development, and some of the things Rinpoche taught, and what I'm trying to learn for myself and share with others. I'm not an expert at this, but I'm sort of trying to share it with others and practice it myself. Now, do you have any questions? Yes?
Mike, it's interesting because there was a question, but you did actually answer it in your talk. But I was wondering what became of the Rinpoche's killer?
I don't want to talk about that. Sorry. Thank you. Anything else? Yes?
Thubten, you mentioned something about empathy being a form of contagion.
Yeah.
So contagion means like a disease of something. So can you help me understand what to do with empathy, and where is the line that you shouldn't be crossing?
There's no shoulds or shouldn'ts. It's more that we will have just that kind of drowning, contagious type empathy until our compassion develops. It's who we are. We see somebody suffering and we feel choked up and unhappy, and that's sort of like a drowning with them, and that's how we are. But then as our practice progresses, we could start to build from there into compassion. I would say empathy is like the first step, and then it grows into compassion, altruism. These are kind of levels of training.
So would compassion be less emotional? And
I think so. I think so. And I think so. And I think what was there's a neuroscientist called Tanya Singer who's done a lot of research into this, and what she found in the scanners was that the empathy subjects were just experiencing misery and cortisol and stress. The compassion meditators were building, is it the prefrontal motor cortex? They were building areas, they were activating the areas of the brain that are connected with intention. And the more you build those, the more you feel motivated to help others. And there's not this kind of drowning in misery.
So would Green Tara be when you do Green Tara, I think it's compassion in action. Would that develop that?
Would the practice develop it? Well, actually, every practice. Every practice, yeah. Every practice does the same thing. I always find it strange how, I don't know if you do this here, but in some of the Dharma centres on the websites and the programs, they describe the different pujas as if they have different, you need Tara for fear, you need Chenrezig for compassion, you need Medicine Buddha for healing. And I've often found that weird, because it sort of suggests that you Tara only does fear, Medicine Buddha only does healing. It separates them. Actually, one practice does everything. The reason there are so many is because different beings have different types of psychology and would be drawn towards one or two of them, but one practice does it all. So yes, green Tara develops what I'm talking about, but so does watching your breathing, if you do it in the right way. Every practice does everything.
And one last question. You mentioned awareness, being aware and how important that is. How is awareness and mindfulness either linked together or the difference between awareness and mindfulness?
That's a really huge subject. Can you be more specific what you're aiming at in the question?
I think you were talking about the importance of awareness.
Yeah.
And then you also indicated that mindfulness is a good thing, but it has its limitations. So.
Okay, but I'm talking about the word mindfulness in a very specific way. Because in Buddhism, mindfulness is a word that's been used all through the centuries.
Yes.
When I said mindfulness in that sense, I was talking about modern interpretations such as mindfulness-based stress reduction, these modern mindfulness courses, which I think are great. I'm not anti them. I'm just saying at some point the practitioner feels they're going around in circles, they've got rid of their stress, but then what? That's all I meant.
So the mindfulness that you're, the Buddhist mindfulness, what is that?
It's a whole subject. How can I summarize this? There are many ways of approaching that. One is mindfulness is what you do in the session that brings your attention back to the moment. You know, when your mind has wandered, and then you bring it back to the support. Whether you're doing prostrations, washing your breathing, Shenrezig, whatever, you're bringing your attention back, your awareness. That's the mindfulness. Another thing is being mindful in daily life throughout the day. Another thing is remembering the teachings when you need them. Remembering the words of the Buddha and applying them in daily life.
So all of those examples are the aspect of mindfulness in Buddhist meditation. Okay.
Ken wrote a really nice piece on Buddhist mindfulness, Ken Holmes. It's on his website. It's really nice. He defines mindfulness from the Buddhist perspective. It's really good. Have a look at that.
Okay.
Anything else? Any other questions? Oh, that's good. Getting off scot-free. Sorry I didn't answer your question, but it's a very painful subject for me, so I didn't want to talk about it. Okay. Oh, you have a question?
I just want to say, if you say that on the street you have compassion for someone who's falling over, but actually should have compassion for everybody.
Yeah.
How do we act on that compassion?
Well, it's not about... No.
Feel good for them?
No, it's about what I've been saying, which is to meditate with bodhicitta, so that we're building the ability to eventually benefit all beings. So it's not about, I have to sort of just go around hugging everyone.
Yeah.
It's, I need to go back to my cushion and meditate to become Buddha eventually. Because if we really want to help others, it'll always be limited until we become Buddha. Because Buddha knows Buddha understands the true nature of mind, and then can help others to do the same. So we're practicing on the path to Buddhahood to benefit all beings, and then our compassion will be of great value. Now, until then, of course, there are levels of development, and so I think it means in our daily life to try and appreciate others as pure. And do you practice deity practice? Do you know about Shenrezig and things like that? Okay, well, here at the centre you might want to learn Shenrezig practice, for example, and one of the aspects of that is to try to understand that all beings are Buddha.
Yeah.
So we visualise them all as deities. So this starts to build this sense that everybody is pure and everybody is enlightened already from the essence, from the beginning. So it's about having that pure view of others. Anything else? No? Do you think we should stop? It's 8:30. Maybe we should stop. It's really nice to spend time with you all. Lama Yeshe Rinpoche wants me to speak to him tomorrow and tell him what you thought of the slideshow. So what shall I tell him? Did you like
Tell
it?
him it was an absolute beautiful, precious, wonderful thing.
And did you like the voiceover?
You don't want to put a label on it. It was just great.
Inspirational.
It's really inspirational.
The voiceover was done by Rinpoche's kind of adopted brother. He's a very famous Indian actor called Kabir Bedi. And when Rinpoche and Lama Yeshe came out of Tibet into India, Kabir's mother, Frida Bedi, adopted them like children, and she became a nun, Sister Palmo. And her son is Kabir, who's a really very famous Indian movie star. And he's kind of always been like Rinpoche's half-brother. It was lovely to see them together. So when this slideshow was made last year, they approached Kabir to do the voiceover. So I think he's got an amazing voice, very beautiful.
And just by the way, if any of you want to read the life story of Frida Bedi, who actually saved them, there is, and they've actually got it in Kensington. It is riveting. Have you read her life story?
No, but I know
It
this
is
about it.
absolutely, it's even more exciting than the same woman who wrote about Tenzin Palmer in the cave, wrote the life story of Frida. It is riveting. I mean, her story is the most courageous, unbelievable thing, and part of her whole mission was saving all the lamas who came from Tibet. She was absolutely inspirational, and the Karmapa, His Holiness Karmapa was her great, she really, I mean, that is so, get that novel, it's not expensive, but it's really something you wouldn't be glued to.
She came to South Africa.
She came, but the things she did in India, I mean, she was a British woman and she did the most remarkable, I couldn't tear myself out
Very
of the book.
inspiring.
It was so very.
So, thank you so much for coming tonight.
Thank you.
And it's really lovely to see you all, and I'm really impressed by the amount of people that came. This centre is obviously doing very well, and it's wonderful to see you all. And I just hope you carry on living Rinpoche's legacy, because this centre is his energy, his activity, and all of you here are living out his wish, which is to bring Dharma to this part of the world. So come to the classes, do the practices, be a loving, warm, harmonious community. That's really, really important. And never ever judge each other. Be loving to each other. That's really important. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
O sanam di tamje zipani tone nyebe janam pamje ne chega naje balan rubai sibe solen rowan